Hello and welcome. My name is Zanel Nguriathi, and on this episode of Behavior Change on HorizonTv, we're going to be discussing boundaries. Now, I'm sure many people are like, what are boundaries? You've heard boundaries when it comes to buildings and property and whatnot, and so when it comes to behavior change, it might be quite new. So allow me to use the same metric, the same standard that you use to define boundaries, to draw a comparison on the importance as well as explain what boundaries are, okay? So let's talk about boundaries with regards to buildings and structure and whatnot. When I talk about boundaries, we know boundaries define what something is. They define the structure of an object. They tell you where not to go. So they necessarily act as guidelines for you at the end of the day. And why boundaries are so important amongst human beings is because we use boundaries to tell other people how to treat us individually. And so what that means is we have to know and we have to understand how we ourselves function at the end of the day, okay? So you need to know how you would like other people to treat you. For example, when they're communicating to you, under which circumstances are you better suited to understand people? Take, for example, if me and you are conversing, as we are now, even though it might be one-sided, if I were to raise my voice at you, would you be able to hear me clearly? Would you be able to understand what I'm saying? Or would you be irritated by the tone of my voice to the degree that you no longer are interested in what I'm saying? See, that example is an example of a boundary. And in that instance, me communicating my boundary would be, I would like to communicate with you, but I do not appreciate you raising your voice at me. Now that would be a boundary I'm communicating to the person raising their voice. So that would be a boundary you would be communicating to me if you're not fond of, tempers or raised voices, so to speak. And so the same way boundaries are used to define structures and give structures the shape that they are, it's the same way we use boundaries to define who we are to people outside of who we are. Anyone that is not you is anyone I'm referring to. Now, everyone you meet wants to understand you, but at the same time, they can only understand you based on what society as a whole is telling them, right? Now, I'm sure you as a viewer are coming to many conclusions about me based on how I look, how I speak, how I present myself. Now that is information that you have based on your experiences. But me coming on here to tell you who I am, what I'm doing, and how I'm communicating, these are all boundaries, so to speak. And so it's very important that we have an understanding of ourselves before we can get to communicate what those boundaries are to other people. I hope we're on the same page here. Okay, so I want to simplify it because even in our previous videos, I am very big on engaging our viewers. I'd like to ask if there are any boundaries that you as a viewer have possibly communicated, not only to strangers out there, but also to your family and your friends. Now, boundaries are important because they keep us secure. The same way the fences and the walls in our homes keep us safe from the elements, they keep us safe from people who would have malice towards us. They keep us safe from all of that. That same way is how the boundaries that we communicate to other people keep us safe. They keep us safe emotionally and psychologically. They do not create stress for us, because once we're able to communicate what we like and don't like, how we would rather be associated with other people, then it gives initiative to the other person to adjust and meet us where that boundary is. And in so doing, it keeps us in a state of calm. It fosters understanding and communication, because if someone is able to meet me at the point where I am, that's truly someone who cares, in my opinion. I don't know about you. But there are many boundaries, so to speak. And growing up in an African household, It's not easy to communicate your boundaries, now is it? Now, this might be for any parent watching. I would like to ask you, if your child is uncomfortable saying no to you, what are the chances that they'll feel comfortable saying it to a stranger? Especially if the stranger is an adult. So I think that there are ways in which we can still foster respect when communicating with parents, while allowing children to know and understand ways in which they can communicate their boundaries. And when we allow the children to speak within our homes in a way that is respectable but still allows them their own autonomy, then we foster understanding amongst each other as individuals within the family, and we strengthen the unit as a whole. So I would like to task you, if there is any parent watching this, I'd like to ask, you as a parent teach your children so many things. You teach them how to dress, how to communicate with you, how to go to school, how to love. You're basically a teacher all your life if you're a parent. How often do you teach your child to say no? Because no is the first boundary. No is the first boundary. When you empower your child to make decisions about their own person, then their self-identity or their core concept, who they are as a person, is strengthened. And then in the previous episodes, we talked about decision making, so to speak, and starting with the boundaries and knowing what you like and what you don't like is something you can start very early to not only teach yourself but also teach your child, and also be comfortable with receiving no as a parent. Now, I know sometimes this talk of no in the house can pop up feelings of rebellion and thoughts of rebellion, so to speak. And whenever your mind goes to that, I want you to just suppress that notion a little bit. Freedom of speech inside the house, as I've mentioned, can follow a respectable structure. It can be structured, and expressing yourself does not necessarily mean going out of the box and being disrespectful. No, it means understanding what this person is trying to say at the end of the day. And that means continuous trial and error. Because you're teaching them something for the first time, it will take time before it begins to make sense. And remember, this is a child we're speaking to. And this is you as well, because you're new to this. And like all things, when you're learning new things, you need to give yourself grace to process for that to become a habit. And then many times you can be inconsistent in that degree. Okay? All right, so when you talk about boundaries, I'm going to talk about why they're important. They're important because when we understand ourselves, then we can communicate with other people. And communication is key in almost every interaction ever, okay? When we meet people, we communicate who we are. It is expected that we know who we are. When we're going somewhere and we meet with at work, there are expectations you're required to communicate. At home, there are responsibilities you are required to communicate. And communication has to come from a place of self-knowledge, so to speak. Otherwise, it would be considered a lie. Okay? So boundaries are very important, and they're even more important when they come with communication skills. These are a pair. So it's not only important to have the boundary, but also to communicate it. And lastly, we have acceptance of boundaries. Take, for example, you borrow something from someone and they say no. What is your reaction? Or let's say, for example, you say hello to a lady on the street and she says she's not interested. How would you take that rejection? If your immediate reaction is anger, if your immediate reaction is disgust, if your immediate reaction is irritation or annoyance, that's normal. Remember, this is an emotional response to something that's happened to you. That's valid. But your behavior following the emotion If your behavior following the boundary that you've received is either to hit someone, to damage something, so to speak, then that is not valid. Because someone has expressed the limits of what they're comfortable with, and your reaction to that is to cause more harm, then I would tell you, you need to face more rejection. And people are entitled to let you know what they're comfortable with and what they're not. And it's your job as a person who is receiving it to process it and look within and ask yourself, why am I having such a hard time with this boundary? Is it coming from a place of entitlement where I feel like no one should say no to me? Is it coming from a place where you've never been told no before? So this is new and unfamiliar, right? Have you understood the reasons why? Now remember, no in itself is a full sentence. It does not necessarily require an explanation. However, from time to time, people will explain why they're saying no or why their boundary is there. So if you can take the time and try to empathize, then you can understand why they are the way they are and why they're expressing. And this is their point of view. So technically, you don't really have a say in that. If it's about how they've delivered the boundary to you, that is making you have an emotional reaction. Let's say, as I've said before, I think raising a voice is raising someone's voice, something that is done very often. And it can be very triggering because once you raise your voice, it's no longer about direct communication, but more so about absorbing the energy of the conversation. Because you're just like, this is me and I need you to pay attention to me. So when it comes to that, maybe you can address how that boundary was delivered rather than the boundary in and of itself. Because remember, this is something that has been communicated to you. It is not going to change. It is your reaction that is going to dictate the rest of the interaction. Because if I communicate and I tell you, I don't like how you're doing things, and your reaction is to get angry, then chances are I will not feel comfortable communicating any future boundaries to you. And if you are a parent and your child tells you, I would rather do my laundry on my own, or I would rather clean my room on my own, now that's a boundary, so to speak. That's an example of a boundary. Then you as a parent can come through and say, okay, I am for that boundary 100%. However, in the past, you've not shown a history of cleaning up after yourself. So I can't really trust you to do something that you haven't been interested in doing. So if a boundary is stated, but there are inconsistencies towards that boundary, then it's very important that you communicate that so you can understand the perspective from which that person is coming. And this is how we start to foster communication. We foster communication, we foster understanding between individuals. And in the long run, who knows, world peace could be within our grasp if we start to understand our personal boundaries and we start to respect the boundaries of others. Okay? And that will be all for our segment today, guys. I just hope that you can take time to really understand what your boundaries are individually and understand what other people's boundaries are. And if you are around people that are not open to explaining their boundaries, then now would be a good time to start the conversation about that. Remember, this can count as small talk. So if you are a person who is not very conversative or talkative, so to speak, this would be a good avenue. Ask the people around you, what are their boundaries? What lines should people not cross? Why are those boundaries there? Get to understand why people are the way they are and build some empathy in the process. And I will see you in the next episode of Horizon TV. Thank you so much. My name has been Zanel Nguriati, a practitioner at Nafsi Wellness and a wellness coach. And I'll see you next week.